Good afternoon, everybody. Professor, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here and be presenting a little bit to the audience, like what we've been doing and working around the fintech space, around a little bit like understanding what's transforming the financial sector as a whole. And again, Católica was pioneer bringing these type of fields into the let's say the syllables of what the school is teaching, and it's a pleasure to share with a little bit with you. As Professor said, like I'll not lose any time with myself, but again, I'm a practitioner. Like I see here in the audience many professors and people that did a great job in the academic field. And myself, unfortunately, we don't have time to do everything. So myself, I've dedicated 100% myself to these markets. As Professor said, like I'm leading Big Start Ventures. It's the only specialized VC venture capital investing in the capital of fintechs. So we hold equity from these companies, and basically we help them growing, getting international. Like last year we sold a company to Google. This year we sold to another company that's now a unicorn. Like I'll speak a little bit about it. So basically it's dedicating 100% of our focus into fintech, insurtech, and the objective of this session is sharing what we've been observing in the market, how we see the market evolving, but again, as the methodology of Católica, typically, like we go a little bit into the top-down approach in the sense that we're going to explain a little bit what are the building blocks of this system, what are the drivers, what are the trends, what's moving, for not being just a static overview of what's happening and just sharing a couple of examples. It's understanding why the movement is happening, and again, as you know, really sparked by the this pandemic situation, but and then giving you also trying to illustrate with a couple of examples. So it's pretty much the session. It's a short session. I think it works a little bit as a teaser. Like during the MIF, we got a long course about this subject that we get deeper into the subject. So feel free to interrupt me, make questions, and in the end, I'm going to leave some space for questions, and again, happy to share with you a little bit this side. So I'll start sharing my screen in full screen mode. If you agree, let me just check if okay. So I think it's pretty much full screen now. I'll just try to minimize this. Perfect. And yeah, and without further ado, I'll start a little bit with why fintech is being so impactful. I like to start with this metaphor, which is basically like we got the same challenge, which is like rolling this stone up the hill, but basically like the fintechs, it's illustrated on the left, right? It's where we get less people, but people very focused, very concentrated in an objective. Like as you can see, or as you know, like there are not so much politics inside the company. There's like the tech team, it's deeply working with the product team, with the marketing team, with the legal team, and sometimes people handle both of the departments or three of the departments. So basically they can tackle and be very agile solving a problem. And on the right side, we see a couple of corporates where as you know, like the incentives are not aligned. Like we got lots of people, but the actual people working in the end might be less people than in the fintechs. And what we've been observing, it's also sometimes even the human resources and the talents, they are flying to the fintech side for the fintech space. Why? Because you get an expert that's doing this for years, and instead of just deploying that tech stack or that technology or that algorithm or this new approach to the value chain or the distribution channels, they will do it diversified, like and concentrate. So and it's pretty much what we've been observing in the market. And that's why fintechs are being so interesting and playing such an important side of the. And again, like in this course, of course, we tend to try to explain a little bit like each of the topics, each of the important information, each of the concepts, and why. Because as you can see, like everywhere in the world, like this image is from Venmo, a PayPal company that's completely transforming the way we interact, and that we basically transfer money between, like in Portugal, of course, we get the example of MBWay, but many things much more flexible, easier, and sometimes even disruptive. If you think of the blockchain and a couple of currencies that are not just following the normal routes like the SEPA transfers or any other type of regulated protocols. So we see tremendous impact on this space. And of course, like we also see this very interestingly in the marketplaces space, where embedded finance is starting to be one of the most important topics. And the example of selling insurance via Drive Now or via any type of car sharing app, it's an example of on the spot where we are. And basically fintech, it's also approaching this type of spaces. Of course, regulation, it's a very important building block of everything what's happening, and being by one side making sure that everything works well, but at the other side, at the same time, we make sure that we are not a showstopper. It's a constant tension between regulators and innovators and even incumbents, and it's very interesting to see. And I think it's another part that we basically as a motivation, like we typically, I would say, fintech, it's trying to disrupt a little bit more content where fintech it's going. I think if we are thinking of let's consider like the advanced economies, the developed world. I think once we speak with the developing countries, like it's even more drastic. The infrastructure that was not available at all before, that's being built now. That's being capable to kind of leapfrog and release a huge potential for people having capacity to store money, people capacity to transfer money between regions and countries, capacity to save, to borrow. So basically, it's impressive, like the impact that the fintech gets in every economy, but especially in developing countries. It's also very interesting to start to see what we call the neobanks, like this type of banks that look like a bank. In the end, some of them are a bank, the other ones just look like a bank. They are, let's say, sitting on top of other guys' licenses, and sometimes embedding banking functions. And this logotype on the right side, it's from WeChat, so basically one of the major social networks in the world and leading social network in China, that basically like also embed the payments, the transfers, savings, and it's very interesting to see like all this movement, everything that's happening around, like let's say this disruption of the banking offer and the banking products. And of course, we get this tension that it's always present, like the incumbents who were doing anything before, and then like all the innovation side of things, and basically like the way how we can, okay, there's of course disruption happening, but there's also cooperation, and in Portugal the majority of fintechs are B2B fintechs. So basically it's also a way and also an important aspect, like the way and how we cooperate, how we structure long-term corporations, and what they could add as value for these incumbents that already get the customers. Some of them still get trust from the customers, and it's very interesting to see how things move. Like one quick example, it's like the capacity that the player like number 26, it's a neobank, like a competitor of Revolut. It's not as well, so known as Revolut in Portugal, but it's also a big player. And basically, it's interesting to see that how important they were. Like they were a tiny percentage of the market share, but they were opening digital onboarding accounts, and basically like it dropped all the competition. It also like moved the incumbents to get into this. More things. There's something very interesting happening, which is like the quantity of funding entering the space. Like it's unprecedented amounts of capital flying into this space. So of course, I think for anybody following markets, like I think it's easy to understand that the quantitative easing, it's of course playing a very important role on, like there's no yield, and alternative asset classes such as venture capital. It's a very interesting space, and of course but the big point here, it's we never saw such a quantity of funding entering the space. Of course, we got some trimesters where we identified a couple of interesting plays, but basically like in a consistent way, it's across all the stages, like we observe an increase in the value. So basically, it's also something that we are observing, and examples and very well-known examples from the Portuguese Fintech. It's the first fintech unicorn out of Portugal. Just so unicorn, basically these in American standards, like more than 1 billion euros valuation. And another interesting example, it's Zigo. It's a UK-based company, but again, it's the result of a merger with the Portuguese insurtech that developed and provided the tech and, let's say, the telematics side of things that got also a unicorn valuation. So we see tremendous speed in terms of customer, let's say, capacity to acquire investment. And of course, this enables lots of capacity to hire good people, even people from the industry with lots of know-how. But now the difference is with lots of focus solving a specific problem. So, and of course, like, again, like by now, like I think we try to do a very, let's say, go around a couple of topics. So basically it's a little bit as a motivation, as a content, what's happening in the fintech space. And just to give you a little bit of flavor before we jump into like a little bit more the building blocks, it's also the Portuguese reality, where we are also like surfing a little bit this wave, and in the sense that we are also having interesting companies entering the space. And again, like it's deeply well mapped, and you got the reference like Portugal Fintech Association identified a couple of every year produces a report with all the metrics, all the data, and all the top 30 fintechs. And it's very interesting to see like clusters that are gaining lots of traction and capacity, like payments. It's of course interesting, blockchain, interesting, RegTech, InsurTech. So those are kinds of spaces where we see very interesting development. An example of Anchorage, Diogo Mónica, it's also Portuguese co-founder, opening a tech hub in Portugal. Of course, the company is incorporated in California, but basically it's a Portuguese founded company, led company. It's an example of really disruptive play in the financial sector, specifically on the settlements of crypto assets. And basically, it's very interesting to see that we are gaining a very interesting traction and dimension on our local ecosystem. And again, like things are popping as examples of the fintech house, examples like of the quantity of companies like in different verticals that I've just mentioned before all around the country. So just to say that it's a sector that inside the tech sector, it's growing very fast. And it's one of the fastest growing tech sector in Portugal and of course in the world. So fintech, again, it's a very important ecosystem, growing a lot. And again, there's still lots of difficulties. And I think like people from this place where we are, that understands regulation, understands typically understands like corporates, understands like the management side, play a very important role and kind of bridging the tech people into the financial world. And this capacity of bringing this dialogue with the government, this dialogue with the regulators, this dialogue also, of course, in setting business operations. There are huge opportunities in the B2B sales space. So basically this is fintech. It's a very interesting tech sector in the sense that it's not just for techies. It's a merge between the tech side, of course, but also the skills from the management side, the financial side, and also the regulatory side. So that's why it's so important connecting these dots. And of course, the people that gets out of the myth, they are also very valuable assets for the fintech space. So basically this was a little bit, as I said, just a little bit to give you a flavor of the quantity of things happening in the fintech space. It's tremendous, the quantity of verticals, the quantity of disruption, the quantity of money flooding into the space. And this first part of this masterclass was basically just to alert you, this is a world basically. But again, now we're going to jump into two big objectives, like a little bit, what is fintech? What's driving this trend? I'll dedicate a couple of moments to the COVID situation and how it sparked all these innovations, speeded up the digital transformation. But I'll finalize trying to put kind of in baskets these innovations. And I'll be very brief. And again, to generate a little bit of discussion in the end of the session. Okay, but starting by what is fintech, and I think this is important. I would like to highlight a couple of words. Like if you have to go away from this session and people ask you, well, what is fintech? Basically, it's joining technology and finance. It's a long. It has a long history. Like it's not just it started much before the internet, and it's basically enabling the financial sector with business models, with innovation. Basically, there's lots of fintechs that are basic disintermediating players. Imagine a bank typically gets money from customers in deposits and lends to SMEs, to individual people, and basically players like, let's say, a peer-to-peer lender or a peer-to-SME lender, like the example of Raise in Portugal or Funding Circle in the UK. Basically, they are wiping out banks from the equation, and it's an asset class, and it's a saving product, and basically it's very interesting to see how things are happening. And there's lots of literature around it. There's tremendous interesting from the academia. And there's of course lots of other, even the CFA nowadays, and something we cover. It's also paying big attention to the fintechs, how AI it's playing an important model on let's say asset picking, also even technically, like deploying strategies and ways to enter and acquire stocks in the market, a couple of algorithmic trading, and it's also an important side of it. Of course, there's fintechs, and of course, once we look at the perspective of a startup, typically fintechs, they look a little bit into the disruption, in the challenging. It's very interesting. I don't know if you know the story of Nubank. Nubank, it's a neobank in Brazil. Basically, the guy from Sequoia, one of the biggest venture capitals in the world, were trying to open a bank account for Sequoia in Brazil. It was so hard that the guy decided, I'm going to open a bank instead of opening a bank account for Sequoia. And it's a 20 billion enterprise value company nowadays. So it's a huge company. And of course, the regulators is very interesting to see how balanced they are. And they say that fintech, it's basically bringing, of course, technology to the financial sector, but it's independently of the nature and the size of the player bringing that innovation. So this, of course, opens the door also for companies like a bank could be a fintech, right? Bringing technology to a segment or a product or something they're doing. And again, as I said, like this is old trend, like the example of Swift that I can imagine everybody already had the experience to transfer money to the US or something like that. It's a network built even before the massification of internet. So it's fintech. It's bringing technology to the financial sector, and this is pretty interesting in the sense that centuries ago, it could be like creating vaults. So basically, and this company, Diebold, basically the guys are still in business and doing ATMs and even creating cybersecurity for banks. So basically, the technology is just an underlying. What they are enabling its use cases. It's making customers like lives easier with a better user experience, or bringing new business models that kind of disrupts the space by disintermediating or bringing new capacities. So basically, it's a really deep sector, really holds, and the innovation will keep going and bringing new frontiers. Like I think we got a couple of cohorts of innovation, and of course, like financial software and core banking systems, like let's say in very infrastructural way, like examples of Avaloq or all funds, like created a very important play in the beginning then we saw tremendous importance on the marketplaces, on the e-payments, and these, of course, after the massification of internet, like creating structures to enable payments were very important. Then, of course, like all the digital challenges from the neobanks to the peer-to-peer lenders, like we observed that since 2010, and of course, this is, of course, also sparked by the financial crisis, of course, because it kind of shaken a little bit the trust on banks, and people start testing and using other types of disruptive business models. And of course, nowadays, like we see a little bit like deep tech entering the space, challenging the way how you collect money, how you basically the layers you get this capacity. Imagine nowadays everybody thinking of APIs, and APIs being an enabler of other type of player, blockchain as a way of doing that, automizing let's say low value added tasks like compliance, and examples like Comply Advantage is pretty strong. And again, we got different cohorts, and we are very keen to see what will going to happen in these decades. And I think it will be pretty interesting to get on top of that. And I'll try to bring a couple of examples even during this session, but of course much deeper on the degree. But basically, and I bring this image typically because these are disrupting the major areas, like spaces like, imagine, wealth management, that we thought that could be a little bit more protected because of the relation and the trust between the advisor, independent financial advisor, the bank, and the customer, are also being disrupted for players like robo-advisors and even tech layers that are enabling the robo-advisors, or the, let's say, the physical advisors and the brokers. So I think it's interesting to see that, of course, there are areas where like this got very, very massive, like the examples of payments, like, and all the evolution of payments. I think it's also very, very impressive, the space of innovation on the blockchain side and the crypto side. Like, I think they are really jumping and deploying new technology really fast. But even the most classical spaces like imagine real estate, mortgages, like even that, it's facing lots of disruption in the space. So I like to bring this image just to give you in this introductory masterclass that all sectors in the financial sector are being observed, are observing disruption. I think if you do this exercise of looking into, let's say, the homepage of a bank, and you think of every product that the homepage gets, nowadays you get one example of a fintech that are unbundling and making more efficient that specific product. It ranges from deposits to loans to transfers to even sending money abroad. Like, there's a range of innovation. I think it's what we were here in mind. So basically, I think fintech, it's not just the payments, not just like the basic areas that we are more exposed. Lots of people, once I speak here in Portugal, like examples of the MBWay of, or imagine Via Verde, so the automatic toll payments that have been developed by SIBS and Brise. Like, it's the classic examples, but we got tons of examples nowadays popping around the world, but also in Portugal, and that's pretty interesting, and to see that's very, very massive. Of course, we'll also look a lot into like where we are, how these fintechs and these small entities crack the market by gathering, and this vision of thinking of a fintech as, let's say, a bundle of resources that get good talent, investors, infrastructure that sometimes go alone or sometimes go via using consulting firms, and then they sell via e-commerce, via marketplaces, via content producers, and gets with a cheaper cost of acquisition of each customer to the final clients. It's interesting to see the way like these type of fintechs operate, or sometimes like these consulting firms, if they go into a B2B perspective, they typically sell to incumbents, and those incumbents typically have to be regulated before they arrive to the final customer. So it's there's lots of stakeholders in the process, and it's very interesting to see a little bit the economics and the reasoning behind why isn't everything as efficient as Revolut. And it makes sense, like, because like, there's tons of investments and processes and teams that operate in a certain way inside the incumbents that are gradually being or substituted or updated using technology. And I think everybody has to think a little bit where you're going to be inside this value chain, inside this challenge and this differentiation that the market is suffering right now, and also the workforces and the transformation of and the reskilling of these workforces. And yeah, so it's pretty much like where I see and what I define as fintech. Drivers and trends. I think this is something that we always try to do, like more than just describing. what is fintech, it's also important to understand what's moving, what's the roots behind this. And I think this trend, it's massive. Like if you look at this comes from Google Trends, and if you look like the speeds and the slope really increased during after 2014, and basically like it got into a huge interest. But why is this happening? I think sometimes people feel and think that these startups, this tech scene, they're nice to have stuff. It's interesting perspectives, but I would say this is much more than that. Like, let's think of America. Huge, I would say the biggest financial market in the world. And basically like the most downloaded apps in 2012 were all from banks. If you look at 2017, 5 years later, all of them were from fintechs, the top 3. So the app, the touch point that every customer wants, every company wants the customer engage with them, they were being conquered by fintechs. And this is massive. If you think of another areas, imagine what happened during 2015-16 with asset management. Basically, we had players like JP Morgan, Fidelity, Vanguard, accumulating lots of assets under management, and the speed that Alibaba with its product Yabao, which in Mandarin stands for spare money, basically like tiny amounts that were then invested in the money market, kind of in a tiny quantity of years, like surpassed assets under management of these huge averages. So again, this is possible just because basically lots of efficiency, lots of technology, and being at the right place where people need and make this efficient. So basically, if I may ask you to remember something from this class, I would summarize in this slide, which is like these very important topics, like what the major, let's say, drivers of transformation comes from trust because of the financial crisis. Talent, it's understanding where they want to go, and we see lots of especially tech talent that wants to work with the cutting edge technology, doing disruptive products with lots of capacity and resources to scale and to build big companies and big business models out of that. So basically, talent is also flying from banks to fintechs. Of course, demography, like the digital natives, and even people that are not digital natives that are completely capable to work and to operate primarily via digital, are getting a very, very big chunk of the market. Of course, venture capital funding and record levels of investments via quantitative easing. Of course, technology like really released lots of the potential. Three quick examples, like the example of cloud computing, and nowadays, of course, it's a little bit like Google Drive or Dropbox, but applied in a company standings. It's very powerful. Like you don't have to own all the infrastructure, and I'm going to show you a couple of figures that kind of grounds what I'm saying. The smartphone, and think of the quantity of data you're leaving every time and every touch you give your smartphone. This is giving in a structured way lots of inputs for many companies to operate with you, to be at the right moment at the right spot, and of course, lots of data where they can use to tailor the product and to keep improving. Blockchain, it's also very, very important and very disruptive potential. If you think, for example, in the financial sector, the quantity of double records and triple records that you get from the single transaction, the inefficiency that we get even in like settlements and clearing, it's huge. And by having one chain, of course, accepted by all the markets, the disruption potential is tremendous. So it's pretty much like these, let's say, building blocks and drivers that we are looking for, and of course, like this is of course damaged by let's say, if we jump into the trust, like the quantity of people that thinks that its banking software offering great services by a fair price, it's very low. And of course, this makes people much more eager to experiment using a Revolut or using a number 26. Again, it's just some figures explaining like the talent flying from big banks to tech companies, and from tech companies to fintech specifically, because a company like Google ranked as #1 loved employee brand, etc. But nowadays we see some of the best talent, thinking this is too big, it's too political right now, and jumping into even smaller organizations. Of course, these digital natives, of course, also very, very important, and they are getting to be massive. These are figures from 2020, so we see this quantity of and this capacity of fundraising getting deeper and deeper by now. Just for you guys to have an idea, like the same rounds, and typically if you go for the venture capital way, I mean, creating a tech company, finding let's say equity partners, so equity investors like venture capital. Typically you do a seed round, then you do Series A, Series B, and you in between you have to prove that you acquire those metrics and you get into the next round. So it's a, let's say, high-speed game. And typically people don't understand the valuations, but basically it works a little bit. And what we can see, it's basically the average, let's say the medium deal size, it's increasing year by year for exactly the same round. So if you see, let's say the top line, a little bit like the light gray in the global medium deal size, it went in 2013 from 5 million to 20 million. So this is 4 times more, let's say the median deal. And in terms of valuation, if you speak of a Series B, the median pre-money valuation, so let's say the enterprise value before the new cash, the fresh cash entering, it grew from 23 million to 70 million. So it's also a huge increase. And of course, this is also a result of, let's say, a little bit of, by one side, like the capacity and let's say the potential of these businesses are being proven, but at the same time, it's also like the available money in the market. So for entrepreneurs, for people starting their own company, it's best time ever to fundraise because of the availability of cash. Regarding, as I said, like this cloud technology, this capacity of building one specific company in, let's say, in 1995, nowadays it reduced a lot, like by using services like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or Azure from Microsoft. This kind of infrastructure layer really is lots of potential, and it's a huge reduction. The quantity of data was never, it's like it scaled hugely, so it's very interesting. And again, this is a little bit for the unbanked people and for the, let's say, the quantity of, let's say, this economy that are leapfrogging the classical financial sector into, let's say, this fintech infrastructure. It's obvious because basically, like, out of the 2 billion people that are unbanked nowadays, we got 1 billion people using smartphones. So it's again a place and spot where you can definitely get and tackle and speak with your final customer. So it's pretty much around it. And of course, mobile, it's built in a way that it's easy. Again, if you think of banks and the classical journey and receiving a physical mail, signing lots of papers, it's not the easiest way, and you have to go yourself to the branch, and like that's not the type of services and the standards that we look for. And of course, COVID-19 had a huge impact on that. And again, the major message, it's of course COVID is it's a tremendous problem for the entire world. Sanitary problem, health problem, economic problem, many real economy. It's deeply depressed, and we're going to see even more depression on parts of the economy, and of course, especially in Portugal, where we get a huge chunk of the GDP directly exposed to hospitality and restaurants. And but basically. In the other side of the equation, like we get these digital companies that basically lots of people say that kind of course in a metaphor way, but 10 years of digital transformation were done in one single year. And there's things that of course we're going to get back, and even like trends on work, and of course we can get a little bit back, but there's things that customers, they don't want to get back, right? They don't, and it's very interesting to see this tension. Like I strongly advise you to read these two articles from Sequoia, this venture capital that invests in companies like Apple, Google, etc. And the guys in 5 of March 2020, like they really signaled that coronavirus were kind of a black swan, and but again, like they recognize that for the tech company, it really accelerated the future, and these tech companies have to seize it and they have to kind of pick that opportunity and to keep doing what they were doing. And I think that's also a very important thing regarding impacts. I think we saw two moments during the pandemic situation. The first moment where we felt that even on the funding side, venture capitals like frozen. Okay, they were just understanding what was happening to see if they could deploy like the reactions, and of course we ended the year like with all-time highs investment levels in tech. So, but in the beginning of the year, like it was frozen. So many companies were afraid of this capacity of having funds, and mature players were basically just moving from physical to remote, and they stopped new corporations, new partnerships, new working with fintechs, and even their digital transformation agenda was stopped in the first moment. But then they were like forced to speed up, and imagine companies around identity, digital journeys were exponentially growing. Some of them like reported 10 times growth, even in Portugal, like on digital onboarding. So basically, in the end, and in a nutshell, COVID was a catalyzer for digital transformation, and the customers don't want to get back to bureaucratic process. And so to finish, and as I said, this is a little bit of like I started to tease a little bit like hot topics of the financial sector and the fintech space specifically. We looked into drivers and trends, definition of fintech, and now I'll just finish the session with kind of 4 building blocks that, of course, we typically go deeper. This is a kind of a matrix brought by MIT that kind of bundle. This is not scientific, let's say, taxonomy of fintechs. This is just a way of grouping them and understand what they're doing. And specifically on the infrastructure side, it's very interesting to see like these new infrastructure and these new rails for the financial sector. I mean identity, I mean privacy, I mean security, I mean banking systems, insurance systems, and this infrastructure and these new rails for the financial sector, it's being built. It's very, very interesting. Another important aspect is, of course, money and payments, and maybe it's the thing that we are more exposed, and apps like MBWay, but also PayPal, also even the cryptocurrencies are filling this gap and making it more efficient. And I'm speaking at a personal level, because then if we go to a corporate level and even a cross borders level, this is tremendous. Like think of ways of sending money to Africa, to Latin, Asia, like the potential value of decreasing the costs and the friction of sending money cross border is huge, especially for unbanked people. Financial markets, of course, trends like social trading such as eToro, robo-advisors such as Nutmeg or Wealthfront are disrupting a little bit like the business perspective of the individuals, but also an algorithmic trading perspective. There's lots of movements in the space, and they're playing a very, very important role on the space. And to finalize, marketplaces. Like I think a bank in the end ends to be a little bit a marketplace in the sense that they collect money from the customers and they give it to SMEs, to people, to big companies, and basically like imbibing these bank products from the balance sheet to the payments to the transfers on the spot where people need. Imagine one of the hottest topics now, it's buy now, pay later. It's basically on the spot. Once you're buying in a digital journey, you being capable to do credit, let's say creating a couple of tranches that you pay that specific item. Imagine a cell phone or something like on the checkout, being kind of almost a new payment method. It's one of the most it's one of the hottest topics actually in the fintech space. So in a nutshell, this is a little bit to illustrate how we map fintech, how we map this fintech disruption, rather if it is B2B or B2C. And again, Thanks a lot for your attention. This is the last slide.